you're doing a good job, your life, what you're doing, the skills you're teaching them should transfer. The validation of other people was incredibly shallow. This monster's ginormous, man, there's no way the business is going to end tomorrow. The world is either happening to you or you're happening to the world.
Welcome back to another episode of the New Rules Podcast. It's your girl, Bri, and I am here with Mr. Adrian Crawford. How you doing today, sir?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
I'm doing well. What's some stuff you've been listening to lately?
One of the main ones I've been listening to lately is called Beyond. It's called Beyond Limitations, I believe. If I'm not mistaken. Let me double check this as we're sitting here talking. But it actually is a good podcast. It's actually called Beyond High Performance. It's actually from the Novus Group. They are a group of they do a lot of executive coaching and things like that. So I've been listening to them, and that's been really, really helpful. Also, I've been definitely listening to the Midnight Boys on the Ringerverse, who they all come out. This is like a bunch of movies and things like that. Van Lathan and all those guys. So it's they've been actually doing a lot of kind of commentary on the show The Penguin, and so it's kind of just casual listening that I like to do because most of my time is spent trying to study and listening to other stuff. So I like to listen to them. They're a part of the same group, that I listen to. It's rewatchable stuff like that.
You're really into movie commentaries.
I am lately. It's something just easy to fall asleep to, and sometimes I'll just listen to it. If unless I'm falling asleep to Lex Friedman having people talking about nuclear war. So I'm trying to lighten it up a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, and then you said the Novus Group.
Yeah, it's called the Novus
What did
Group.
you like? You didn't say what you liked about them.
They are a group of executive coaches, and so they just talk a ton about just their practice. They have different people they actually coach, different things they do, and so just kind of they get into the intrinsic things. I think a little bit of their practice is a little bit of what we do, as far as they do a lot of internal work that leads to external kind of performance for other people. So it's really been it's intriguing listening to just a group that seems to be doing really well at what they do. So I've really enjoyed it.
Nice, love it. Well, today we're going to talk about something called transactional versus transformational leadership.
Yeah. I think that most of leadership today is really transactional leadership. It's kind of transaction. It's you do something and you get something in return. And it's okay, I give you, I give you orders, I give you things to do, they go do it. Transformational leadership is really you're trying to see really internal frameworks change in the person that you are actually leading. Not just kind of giving them orders, just hoping they do their job, but actually that they would get better and that things that would be impactful even when they're not there working for you. And I think that, again, transactional relationships highlight a leadership, but I think it's leadership that's incredibly just kind of shallow and not really something that makes real impact.
What made this idea come to your mind?
Just working with people. I think as I started to work with people, a lot of the people we're working with, I think a lot of what we've been taught has been transactional relationships and transactional leadership, to where it's been, let's help equip people so that they can do a job well, but not actually that's going to help them in their lives. So it's okay, man, help them better at being able to, market, help them be able to be better at organization, help them be better at, whatever their job is selling, so on and so forth. Which, again, that is a very important thing. That's part of your job. But actually, I think it's way more than that. I think your leadership, if you're leading someone, your impact should be beyond just their ability to just do a job. And again, that is, a lot of people have disagreements in that, but I actually believe it is the way of the 21st century leader. I believe it's leadership well beyond. And as a matter of fact, if you even talk to leaders, they always tell you it was the leaders they always reference to were those who made an impact beyond just the workforce. It was stuff that they learned that went beyond just in their current work, but it was somebody who went above and beyond. And so that's kind of why we're kind of talking about it. And I think it's something that's really needed.
You've talked a lot about, or you phrased it a little bit differently in the past before in terms of managers versus leaders. And you've said a ton about how the world that we're going, we are not going to need managers, we're going to need leaders. Can you break down that concept a little bit more and why you think that that's something that we need in the future?
Leaders are those who really inspire, they motivate, they build followership. And that's really needed right now because when we're living in uncertain times, uncertain markets, things are changing very rapidly with the rise of even AI and what that's bringing into the market and bringing into the workforce now, uncertainty with global issues that are going on. And so with those things changing, you actually need people who can lead during those times. And what leaders really do is, like I said, they inspire, they motivate, and they can help change internal frameworks of other other people, so that when you're moving forward, you're not just those who are just giving orders and people following orders, but actually those who can learn how to create and think. Because the more you can build people who can create and think on their own, the more I think momentum you actually build and you get. See, in good times, you know, in kind of settled times, you know, managers or transactional leaders are fine. You know, you do a job, you get this, and you just kind of move on. But right now, I think things are a little bit different.
Can you tell a story about a time you've been transactional and a time you've been transformational?
Yeah, I think a lot of times early on, I was very transactional, though I cared about wanting to see the internal frameworks of people. But what it was for me was like, hey, people were a means to an end for me early on, where it's like, they have a job, I want you to do the job because I'm trying to get somewhere. It was a lot more my leadership, though it would come off as transformational, was about me trying to get to a place. And I figured, well, if I act this way, this is going to help me get somewhere, versus being like, man, no, I was just there to just invest in people regardless of what happened. And so as I've kind of gotten through time and years, I think that I started to realize that, you know, had a young man who worked for me, who's now out there doing incredible amounts of great work with video, you know, doing videos and things like that. When he first started with me, he was just a kid that came out of college and he just wanted to get in. This was when I was doing basketball skill training. But, you know, what I did was that really it was a lot of just transformational type of leadership stuff, to where even when he got out of basketball, he even talks to me about it all the time. It was able to, he said it was, you know, how it impacts him now and what he's actually doing, and his ability and his workforce and things like that. He also talked about being around me a lot. You know, he got to see, man, what it actually meant to, you know, even father, you know, being a father. What does that actually look like? What does that mean? And so I felt like those are types of transformational things, because I wanted to make an impact to him beyond just the workforce. I wanted him not only to be great at whatever he does, but I also want him to be a good citizen, someone who's actually real value into his family, his community, things like that. I actually think that's what leaders really do. And I think that's what business leaders should do. We have gotten caught so much today thinking that our only job as leaders in a company is just to affect people at the job. But actually, those people have other lives. And I think that if you're doing a good job, your life, what you're doing, the skills you're teaching them should transfer. I think if you're not doing that, I don't think that you're really that good of a leader, if you're not actually helping people's lives be impacted beyond just in the workplace.
Is there any part of transformational that requires transactional?
Yeah, I think the idea of transactional is needed, because when you're working and leading, there are transactional things. You know what I mean? With you working for me, there are things where I'm like, hey, Bri, I need you to do this, right? And that's not going to be like this internal transformational thing that may be going on at that time. It may just be, man, we have some deliverables. You got to get the deliverables done. And that's my expectation. But if that's all there ever is just that, hey, you have a job, do your job, that's it. And there's no impact beyond that, then that's where I think it doesn't go. But I think there are transactional things, but it must go beyond just the trade for goods type thing.
How have you developed into a transformational leader, and where do you find yourself faulting on that?
I started really getting to that place of becoming a transformational leader probably actually around, man, I would say started really about 12 years ago. And honestly, it's when I started therapy. Because what I started to realize was that I began to realize internally, I started dealing with my own stuff that was going on in me. I started fixing my internal frameworks, because a lot of my transactional leadership was based off of wanting to get approval, wanting other people to validate who I was, versus once I started doing internal work, I started realizing that the validation of other people was incredibly shallow, though it's fine to have that, but it was something that would never satisfy. And so once I started doing that, I stopped looking at people as a means to an end and saying people were the point. People are the point of actually going out there, impacting their lives. It is to go out there and to challenge them. And when I'm saying this, I think that when we start having these conversations, a lot of leaders go to this place of, oh yeah, that's fine, but we're here to make money, not to, feel good and, and just make people have warm and fuzzies. That's not what we're talking about. Actually, we're talking about people who, they aren't dependent upon you. I think that what a lot of leadership is people building things that they're so dependent on a system, or they're so dependent on a person to just bark orders to or give them orders and then hold them accountable, versus them having the ability on their own to think that way. And so when I started doing my own stuff, working internally, started realizing what were my triggers, what was the way that I was my internal structures were coming out into the world. That's when I began to really change, and I really began to realize that people weren't the end, and I didn't need them to get approval. I need to realize that, man, I'm going to do this. I'm going to help them regardless of whatever they can give to me. And that's kind of how I live my life and live leadership, that if people have been brought my way, I believe our responsibility as long as it's a two-way street, meaning that like they're willing to work, I'm willing to work, that my job is to help them while they're here. A lot of people won't be here long term. They'll be here for a short time of their journey, but I realize I have a responsibility why they are here is to actually help make an impact in their lives.
We talk a lot about internal structures, but I don't think we've ever really described what we mean by that. Can you describe that?
Yeah, I think internal structures are just, it's the things that are inside of you that really how you actually deal with the world. We have internal structure. So like, for example, an internal structure would be for me, whenever someone would, maybe critique me, right? A structure of how I dealt with critique wasn't to be, we talk about alligator, samurai, whatever. An internal structure for me would be the samurai. That's how I dealt with criticism. It wasn't like, man, to be constructive, whatever. I just ran myself through. Another internal structure would be, man, how do you respond in difficult situations? Like, do you like fight, flight, freeze? What do you do in those moments? That's an internal structure. Like the things that go on inside of you when certain moments and pressures and situations happen, what's happening inside of you starts to just play out in different ways. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so, for example, you may start off where, man, you feel fear. That's an internal structure. But what happens in that fear, instead of leaning into it, or instead of like dealing with it, what you will do is then fight. Like you're on the outward working of that is, man, like you feel so much shame inside, but the outward working of that is now your fight. You're the alligator. You never take responsibility. You always push against people. And so that's what I mean. It's the things that are happening internally, emotionally, that actually are the way that how you view and shape the world. And that just plays out in real life.
What pressures still push you into being transactional?
I think that when things become tight, because if it's a transition or transition of clients, and so we're kind of in that that moment where you're in a transition of a new client, or some new clients, or clients offboarding, new clients coming on, and so financially you start to get there. And so what you end up doing, you then start looking at everyone saying, okay, well, man, what are you actually bringing to the table? What dollar amount are you bringing? People start becoming about, no, your value is about the dollar amount that you bring. And that's when I can get there, that pressure, because I do feel the pressure of a responsibility for those who work for me. And so that's kind of a way I can go to start making things become transactional with people when I think when finances get tight, which then, again, that goes to a lot of like my life story. That's kind of how it was. That's where I saw money growing up, was that it was just, man, it was just always a worry. People always freaked out about it. It was never really talked about. It was just a thing you had to have, but in having money, it was never seen as like, it just always thought to bring stress or fear or whatever. And so that's kind of how, for me personally, I still have to fight through that right now.
And then what internal structures do you use when that happens?
I think those moments, for me personally, what I do is, I really, our practice of what I would say, we talked about it called dumping the box, where I'll take 5 minutes to just say where I'm at, if I'm to where I'll really, whether if it is to pray, if it's to write, it's to whatever, and just say, this is where I'm at right now. So if I'm feeling fearful, just admitting that, man, I feel fear. Well, why do I feel fear? I feel fear because, man, what if these clients don't come through? Then what am I going to have to do there? What happens with, what happens with Bri? What happens with JT? What happens with these people? Blah, 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 blah. And so for me, many times as I start talking it out to myself, it's the monster doesn't seem as big. A lot of times the initial thing is like, oh my gosh, it's so that this monster's ginormous, man, there's no way the business is going to end tomorrow. But as I start talking it out, it gets smaller, because then I start getting underneath the hood. And a lot of times it's a lot of self-doubt that I don't feel like I have the skill set or the ability to actually accomplish what it is that we're actually doing.
The more that you're elevated in leadership, the less there are other people surrounding you that are transforming you. And the more your role is to ensure that you're transforming and empowering others. With the leadership position that you're in, how do you continue to be transformed?
I think one is always having some other people that you're around that can actually help you. So I have a few people who are, that I think that are, whether if it is those who are mentors of mine, to where I can constantly talk. I also try to put myself in situations around other high capacity people, because that's a way that I see how they're moving, how they're operating. That does that. And I think also I'm just always trying to learn and grow and study and be better and put myself in situations to do that. I think, I kind of wrote this down as like the idea of like about being transformational, about ownership. You know what I'm saying? It's on this whole thing of like either the world is either happening to you or you're happening to the world. And so the whole thing for me is like I want to take responsibility for my actual like transformation and helping do that. So I always tell people I want to take ownership, and I think that's the key crucial thing when it actually comes to this.
It's challenging to carry that weight every day. Like I'll say that's a hard thing to do.
Yep.
So what are some things that you do in order to prepare yourself every single day to carry that kind of weight with the people that you're leading?
Yeah, I think that especially of late, I think winning the mornings are incredibly important. So, over the last few weeks, I've really just kind of shifted my entire morning kind of routine to where, I am trying to be in the office, by no later than like 6:30, but usually I'm up at like 5:30, 6 o'clock or whatever. And I'm doing a lot of practice, it's kind of like get up. And right now, one of the things I've been trying to do a better job of is like in the morning, I do a lot of more like kind of sitting in silence, meditating. And like kind of like I do that meditation like prayer, but it's all silence. Then I read, again, as I've talked a lot, my faith is very central to my life. So again, I read the Bible. I do things that kind of helps increase my capacity there. Then what I do is I really try to work on a skill, like a very clear skill. So right now, because a lot of what I do is a lot of disruption. And so I've been listening to a lot of people who are doing and studying people who've been very much so disruptors. So listening to interviews and podcasts and reading on just really on those disruptors. Because what I'm trying to see is, man, what are certain things that they're doing? What sparks an idea for me? I try to put myself in their shoes. If I was doing what they were doing, how would I feel in that moment? Would I have the guts to make that decision? Why wouldn't I have the guts to make that decision? So I work on a skill. And then from there, what I try to do is, do what we call like deep work. I'm working on a specific thing that day. So if I'm thinking about coaching, if I'm thinking about writing, whatever, I really spend about an hour and a half trying to do that. So I'm really trying to win my morning very clear. And there's some mornings I do great, some mornings I don't do great. But that's what I realize when I do that, I really get ahead and I really feel the capacity increasing and growing.
Yeah, there's something about choosing what is going to have access to you before you start the day, and you don't really have the luxury of choosing how you're going to be interrupted that day.
Yeah, like I'll be honest, and I've been noticing this the last like few days, like like going on just like social media, like not because it's not bad at all. I think it can be a thing at times you relax, but what I started to realize was that it had become such a habit of mine that it's just like this thing, kind of dull out you go, and you just kind of start doing it to where it really started to impact me. And what I mean by impact, I mean not the content of it, but just like I'm just constantly doing this, and then it's like maybe 30 minutes later, you're like, what did I just do? Mm-hmm. Like I feel like I didn't do anything, and I'm just feeling right now that so I just really work very hard to try not to really be on social early, and that's
it's
difficult.
How much it generates passivity.
No, it does.
Because you're just like dull.
Yeah, and it's like you end up being, and then and again, it's the weirdest thing for me because I finish, you're doing it, and you're like, it's not like I had something I was due right there at that moment, but I literally feel now that I lost by just sitting there doing that. Instead of having time. No, there's nothing wrong with hey, man, have a break or whatever with I keep doing this work. There's nothing wrong. 15 minutes, go do your thing, whatever. But I also feel early in the morning doing that stuff like that, I just think it's so important to get momentum in the beginning of your day.
And so you walk into the day, you're feeling good, and you're ready for all of the things that are going to come at you, and all the internal structures are going to help people build, and practicing all the internal structures that you've built and the pressure points. And then lately we've been talking about the West Wing a lot, and the quote, iconic scene, but where he says the line where he's like, for once in this job, I wish that I felt as good at the end of the day as I did whenever I started it. How do you turn the page again?
No, it's kind of honestly, it's I think athletics a little bit prepares you for it because you always chase a perfect game knowing you'll never get it. Mm-hmm. Every basketball player wants a perfect game. I think about my senior night. We weren't great my senior year, but my senior night here at Florida State, it was it was like a storybook game. You know what I mean? We end up winning. We beat a team and kind of like stopped their chance going into the NCAA tournament. It was all this stuff, and I played really, really well. The thing about it, though, is like, even though it was like a storybook game, I wasn't perfect. I missed some shots. You know what I mean? I had a turnover. Like, I didn't, I could have got more rebounds, whatever. But you still go chase that perfect game. And I think that's what gets me up the next day. It's like, okay, no, can I go chase this day to be a better leader? And so what I'm trying to do is go back and look throughout why didn't I like accomplish like why didn't it end the way that it started? And try to grade myself based off of, instead of a perfect, having this perfect day, I'm trying to actually look at how do I, what would I rank myself? Was it a 80? Was it a 90? Whatever. But also, I need to go back and see, why did it go sideways? And what I've come to realize with me, when my day starts to go sideways emotionally, it's like my mantra this year, this idea of like clarity wears, the idea of clarity wears the crown. And with that, I wasn't clear. I wasn't taking on the responsibility emotionally that I needed to. So I may have been frustrated, and instead of me just being very clear, like, no, this is wrong, this is off, no, we're not going to do that, I'll eat it, and then I'll just kind of go through, and then like that just kind of spins it, you know what I mean? Versus just being very, very clear on decisions and things like that. And so I find lately that's when I go sideways, when I'm like, no, I just should have handled this situation this way. I allowed this situation to create anxiety in me. I allowed this situation to get me frustrated or make me sad or make me angry. I allowed a situation maybe, with having, an adult son and having like, two teenage girls. It's like, man, stuff they're going through is their work, their process. I allowed fear to get in the way of that. So it becomes, that's usually when my day goes there. I allow the negative emotions to actually begin to infiltrate my life a lot more.
Is that where most people find themselves?
I think so. I think that, like, because if you think about it, let's say you're going through your day and all of a sudden, you have a client or you have an account, and that big account that you have, they decide to stop being, working with you or whatever. Well, yes, there's not the instant impact of the money. Like, it's not like all of a sudden, oh man, like all the money that, you weren't getting paid is like it all left at that moment. It's the emotion of that. It's the fear usually. It's the shame maybe. Man, I could have done a better job. It's the anger. Oh, they just aren't with me. You may be frustrated with them. And like I said, maybe the fear of like, man, what's to come? Because this is a huge account. And so now financially, how am I going to be impacted by that? So that's what happens. We allow the emotion, not so much the situation, but the emotions to impact us. And we don't regulate ourselves. We don't do the practices that we need to do in order to get ourselves back regulated. Mm-hmm. And so that's why I think it just compounds. Then maybe another thing that comes up, and that's another emotion. And it just keeps going and going and going until you find yourself by the end of the day, you're mentally and emotionally exhausted.
Mm-hmm. And so it's not that you shouldn't feel angry or sad or upset about it. It's more about, do you have the self-control, the internal structures during the moment or after the fact to do what you need to do to alter your perspective?
Yeah, to alter your perspective and to honestly like deal with it in the right kind of way. Yeah, if all of a sudden somebody, let's say you have a project that you're doing and one of your direct reports, man, just drops the ball, and they say they've done it multiple times. Yeah, it's okay to be frustrated, and it's okay to verbalize that frustration. Well, if that's, we always talk about dumping the box. Now, I'm going to verbalize that frustration. You should be mad. That's not just kind of like go through it. No, you should be upset and be mad. Then from there, it allows you, once you get that out, it then allows you, okay, how do you address it? Because then this becomes the other issue. Knowing, we talk about internal structures and makeups, that if you don't have the right, your internal makeup becomes, confrontation, for example, that you shrink back from confrontation. So now what that internal framework that you don't deal with, because you get in a tough situation and you go to flight, you will not address that direct report. And the only time you'll eventually address it is when you get so pissed off at them to where you just explode at them. And they don't even see it coming, versus in those moments dealing with it. No, what's going on? How do I address this? How should it be addressed? What should be the the ramifications for the act of what they did, and deal with it right there so you can see it clear and actually deal with it. I know that's one of the things for me. A lot of times is that when I begin to not talk very clear and deal with stuff right from the beginning, that's when it begins to impact me. And so I have to really be able to have a clear mind and then be able to address it right away.
And so you've mentioned your mantra for the year, which is clarity wears the crown. It's funny because I was going to mention mine, which is carry your weight. because we started talking a little bit about ownership. And one of the places where I found that one of the biggest things about Carry Your Weight for me is about essentially becoming a transformational leader. Like, where are the ways where I don't do what I say that I want to do because I'm afraid of X, Y, and Z. For those, not everybody wants to be a transformational leader. And then you have people who do, but they don't do what they should do in order to be a transformational leader. So for those that would say, like, yeah, I just don't want to do that. I don't want to carry that kind of weight. I don't want to pay attention to those kinds of things. What would you say to them?
Yeah, I think you're actually selling yourself short, and I actually think you're not helping humanity move forward. I'm not saying you have to be some leader who has to lead 10s or 15, 20s or 30s or 50s or 100s, whatever. But like, if you're a parent, you need to be a transformational leader. You need to work on the internal things to help your children actually build those internal structures and frameworks so they can be productive citizens into the world. If you're a friend, you know what I mean? Like, sometimes as a friend, you need to be a transformational leader, because sometimes, you know, like, you being that could eventually, you know, it can inspire one of your friends. You know, I have friends of mine who are transformational leaders, man, and being around them, they really do inspire me to even be better when you get around them. So I actually, when people say that, I think it's them limiting their time here on this earth and planet, because I believe every human being should be a transformational leader. Now, and maybe at your job where you're like, man, I don't want that type of leadership. I just want to work the job. I mean, I'm fine with having somebody I report to. I got my projects. I don't have to oversee nobody. I just do I think there's nothing wrong with that. I think that's fine. And because I can respect that, because you're at least being honest. But I do believe that at some level you will have to be a transformational leader at some point in your life.
What would you say to the person who is listening and they're like, I want to be a transformational leader. Right now, I'm just kind of managing life, but I want to become that. But they don't find themselves around people who are that. What's a step that they can take to develop?
Yeah, I think that first you need to do an audit and say, what is stopping you from doing that? Like, what's kind of are things inside of you that makes things transactional for you? You know, when you just are, like you said, just going through life, like when you go to your job, why are you just checking? You know, you probably work hard, but why are you just kind of going there? I can't wait to get to the end of the day. Why is that? What about your job? Is it just about getting there? You know, sometimes like, well, it's just, you know, I'm just working in a cubicle doing this. So how can I find excitement? Well, I think a lot of times that's a bigger thing about finding purpose and calling. And we talk a lot about that. Like, I think a lot of times people think a job is their calling and purpose. It's not. It's actually what's underneath that. And so I think you can find any job or anything that when you can really see like your purpose and calling actually come out. So I think you have to first audit, like, why are you just kind of managing life? I think the other thing you need to audit is like, when, you know, where are you at emotionally? When things hit, how do you respond? Start doing a journal of just like an emotional journal of your day. When things hit, good, bad, whatever, how are you responding? What are you feeling internally in those moments as well? I think if you don't have people around you, so that's the first thing. I think the next thing is like, man, in the day where we're so like connected, I think it's really important to be able to, you know, there's a lot of transformational like leadership podcasts and things like that. So, man, I would try to find something like that to be able to do it. I think one of the things I did, man, with the Chat GPT, so I started working on this future self kind of project of saying, man, what would I like to see in 10 years? And so I remember me and you were having that conversation about it. Here's what I'm thinking. Here's this. And then you gave me some really good insight for stuff. So I just started writing that out, you know, kind of, man, I seen this, and just kind of there's ideas and thoughts that start flowing. And then I went into Chat GPT and I was like, hey, man, can you help me frame this? Because I've got it to a point now where it really understands my voice, and it started doing that. And then I asked it this question. Okay, if this is where I want to be in 10 years, then what daily structures would you put in my life in order to do that? And so it was crazy. And then I was like, oh, but it starts spitting this stuff back to me. And so some of the stuff that I'm doing now came from that. It actually came from, you know, from actually me going in and saying, hey, 10 years, how do I work myself backwards from there? And so I think, man, there's so much access to do that today. I just think it's just starting with something as simple. So, man, maybe this is audit. Maybe it's starting to listen to some podcasts. Maybe it's just, man, getting into Chat GPT and just starting to kind of just start writing and doing it. What would you do? Here's where I'm at. How would you begin to change this? And just keep digging a little bit deeper. That could be that.
When I say transformational leader, who are some public figures that come to your mind?
I mean, top of mind, I would say like Jensen Hung from NVIDIA. I really
I
like
love
him.
him. I was just listening to a video from him this morning.
Yeah, I like him. I think Jared Lorenzo from Fear of God. I mean,
Mm.
I see, what he's built with his brand and what he's trying to do. And I even think the impact of how he's trying to build that. I think he's just people come top of mind. Someone in the faith space I think really does this really well is Craig Rochelle. Craig Rochelle, he is a pastor of, I think it's the largest church in America now called Life Church, but he also leads the Global Leadership Summit. I mean, he's just a Class A leader. So those are like three people top of mind that I actually think are like very, very like effective leaders. I think there's another coach in the athletic world, you know what I'm saying? I think Danny Hurley is a guy who does that. I think Danny has his impact that he has on his kids' lives. He's
We
very
should
authentic.
actually shout out that interview that he did.
Oh, yeah.
We should post about that.
Yeah, we will. We'll put in the link. I can't remember the guy's name, but it's like, the recent video with Danny Hurley. I think Danny's Danny, and he is who he is. But I think he really does really want to see the lives and the change inside of young men. And so he's very clear the type of men he wants to coach and how he wants to do it. And he's very committed to doing it that way. And so those are a few people I can think of.
Lauren's hand is raised.
Earlier when you were talking about people who are like, oh, I don't want to be a transformation leader, do you think that, obviously it's possible to be a transformational leader and not be super moral, but could the lack of desire to be a transformational leader be tied to morality, or is it more likely that they just aren't aware of what all the levels of being a transformational leader is, or like viewing parenthood as a transformational leader for other people?
Yeah, I think a lot of times I don't think people are aware. I think when we think of like transformational leadership, we'll just think of people like Elon or, as somebody who's like, they're doing stuff that's transforming industries and things like that. You know what I mean? And so I think people won't think of parenting because it's like, oh, just being a parent. You're like, no, like being a parent, one of the most important transformational leadership things you could ever do. So I think a lot of times it's a lack of awareness for people where I think they feel like they can be, because I think a lot of times we only think it's in a company and organization. But I mean, being a transformational leader, man, being honest with you, my high school basketball coach was a transformational leader. He really cared about us as human beings, and he was willing to say very difficult things. Like he inspired, he motivated us. He challenged us to not only what we need to be on the floor, but off the floor as well. And what he taught us translated, you know what I'm saying? Like he taught me so much about accountability of like, I don't care how good you are, you're responsible. And so somebody like that, we're like, would anybody think, oh, a high school basketball coach, is he transformational? I would say absolutely he was. Because again, he inspired and motivated me. And even this day, 30, 40 years later, I'm still like right there. I love him, care for him, and he impacted my life. So I just think that that's a long answer to say I don't think people really understand at times all the different ways they can be transformational. I think they only think it's like in these big, huge ways to do that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so say I'm a mom, I lead a small group at my church,
Yep.
and I am in charge of like a medium-sized team at my job.
Yeah.
Is the essence of who I am a transformational leader, or do I need to be a different kind? Like, can I be transformational here and not here or here?
That's I actually think it's the essence of who you are. Like I think that one of the key things of being a transformational leader, I think, is definitely authenticity. So I think when you're leaning into your skills and gifts, so it's like, say you're, like you said, there's somebody in their church, they're leading a small group. Okay, well, if you're there's a deep care. You're volunteering your time for other people to develop and grow in their faith. And that's so much of internal things, right? So that is transformational. But I also think that same heart that you have when you go to work, it's the same thing. I just think it's a good point, Lauren. I think a lot of people, they go to work now, and the thing that they're really good at, right? Like they don't do that there, where they're just very much so like, well, no, at work, I've got to be this way because I'm at the job, versus like, no, like, you literally care for people. Like, and everybody says, man, you're so great, you changed my life. And then you go to work, you're trying to be like, some dictator. You're like, no, be who you are, care for people out of that. So the answer that I think actually you should be, I think being a transformational leader should always be in the essence of actually who you are. Yeah,
right.
I
Like
do.
It seems like a passivity or a difference towards transforming others in any sphere, even if you do it in one, would be immoral because of you're limiting your contribution to society's progression by saying I'm not going to use my gifts and my skill sets within this specific place for whatever reason.
Yeah. And I see people, and again, in the idea of like faith, it's like I see that a lot. I think people don't have a proper time view in theology because it's, oh yeah, I'll do that in a small group because these people want to grow in their faith. Well, I also believe that we're, if you're a Jesus follower, you're called to be a blessing to the nations. And so in that does not mean, that every person you talk to is going to come to a place of the beliefs that you have, but you still can be a blessing to them. So I believe, and I always say this all the time, as a Christian, I believe like the essence of who you are should be transformational. I 100% believe that. I don't think there's any other way to live as a Jesus follower than to be transformational, because the actual person we follow was transformational. He came in a completely different way, lived a completely different life, but it was about, giving his very best, for the betterment of others. I always tell people one of the most powerful stories is the idea of like when it says that the most, all authority in heaven and earth has been given unto me. And then the next act you see of him doing is taking off like his robe, which was a sign, he was a rabbi, so it was a sign of his authority, his like job, his title, whatever. He took that off and then put a towel as a servant and washed his disciples' feet. And so what it was a sign to show like, as at that time, being the most powerful person that's ever walked the planet, he leveraged that for the betterment of others. And I think that's really the essence of how I think people are called to walk. And I actually think if Jesus followers walk that way more and more, I think there are people who really do. I think there are more, there are a lot that actually walk this way, but I think that there needs to be more and more people like that who really genuinely leverage who they are and their skills and their gifts for the betterment of other people. And I think a lot more transformation would happen. So, sweet. Well, guys, hey, I hope today was actually helpful for you. Remember, being transformational is meant to inspire, to motivate people, to help them take that step. Your concern is not about what they can give you, but actually what you can actually give to them, because you want to be, as a leader, make an impact well beyond just their time with you. You want your leadership or your ability to impact them when they go home, when they're in their communities, when they're no longer maybe being a direct report, even working in the company that you're in, but their lives have been impacted by you. I always say, like, the echo of your life is still moving forward because of what you've actually done to help other people. And so I would encourage you today that, start taking that next step. Just sit down and say, maybe you just need to audit your life. Why aren't you being transactional? What are the things that hold you back? Maybe you need to start listening to some different podcasts from other transformational leaders. Maybe, again, you need to just, start brainstorming through ChatGPT or with a friend. Until next time, keep writing the rules.